Welcome to the Procurement Software Podcast, where we aim to educate and inspire you about how technology is changing and shaping our profession. The truth is, there's never been a more exciting time to be in procurement, but only if you're one of those organizations that's embracing the change and driving new developments. And this podcast is all about giving you the tools to help you get there. So buckle up and let's get right into this week's show. Hi there, James here, and welcome to another episode of the show. So in this month's episode, we're actually going to be doing something a little bit different. As some of you, especially those of you who read my newsletter, will know, I was in Brazil in March. And during my trip, when I was in Sao Paulo, I got the opportunity to meet with two great procurement tech founders in the city. And one of them, Raphael, who is the co-founder and CEO of Growing Co. They are a co-manufacturing platform for consumer packaged goods firms. He actually asked me if I'd be interested to do a podcast recording during my time in Brazil. And he also managed to rope in Leo, who is the co-founder and CEO of Linkana, which is another Brazilian procurement tech startup in the vendor master data normalization SRM space. And the three of us got together in a podcast studio in Sao Paulo and we recorded this episode. And Rafa has very kindly agreed to let me publish it on my channel too. So yeah, I hope you like it. Just for context, Rafa is the host and is interviewing myself and Leo, who were essentially his two guests. I really loved doing this. Thought it was a great conversation, some fantastic insights. So yeah, it's not just about Latin America. It's procurement tech in a wider context. But if you are interested in how this space is developing in the Brazilian or the wider Latin American market, I strongly recommend to connect with both Rafa and Leo. And I will link to their LinkedIn profiles and to their companies in the show notes of this episode. So here it is. Hope you enjoy it.
Great. So I'm here today with James and Leo, good people that I've met before. So thank you for coming, for joining us in this podcast. So without any further ado, I'd like you guys, of course, to introduce yourselves and also what Procurement Software does and what Linkana does. So James, if you can start.
Yeah, thanks, Raphael, and great to be here spontaneously to make this happen. So procurementsoftware.site is essentially a directory of procurement technology solutions, and we help especially procurement leaders in mid-market businesses to find the right procurement technology for their organization. And we also do, advisory work on behalf of procurement tech companies as well.
Perfect. How did you start it? Where the inspiration came from?
Yeah, so my background is I'm a procurement professional. So I spent 16 years in corporate procurement in the UK, where I'm originally from, and in Germany. And I felt like a very well-paid admin assistant a lot of the time in my procurement career. And I was just really curious to dive a little bit deeper into the tech landscape beyond, the big legacy brands that sponsor all the conferences and have the massive marketing budgets. And that, led me into a really deep and diverse ecosystem of procurement tech that's really just grown and grown since I first started looking at it back in 2020.
Mm-hmm. So the company exists for 5 years already.
The company, as a freelance consultant, I've had the company for 6 years, but in its current modus operandi as a procurement tech company, well, a research company on procurement tech, we've been around for 3 years.
Perfect.
Great, Rafa. Thanks for having me. Nice to talk to you guys. Nice to see James again as well. So happy to chat about procurement.
Now in Brazil, right?
Yeah.
And we meet here. Yeah.
James came. He liked the warm beaches and sun. So I wouldn't blame him. Yeah, so I'm Leo. I'm co-founder of Linkana. We are a SRM solution based here in Brazil that we're basically take care of supplier onboarding, documents validation, risk management. We automate when we make much simpler for suppliers to be onboarded in enterprise companies. And yeah, that's basically it.
Great. So we are talking here with Procuretech, either co-founder or consultant, like very specialized in this area. So what are like the disruptions that you guys are seeing in Procuretech right now for both of you?
I think the buzzword rings in all of our heads when we think about AI and all of those breakthroughs in terms of agents, operators, and how fast enterprises are seeing those new technology and also being able to implement them with real use cases. So I think that's the biggest disruption. Some are calling the end of SaaS. I'm a SaaS. Raphael also as a SaaS. So it's kind of, people are kind of saying we're going to die sometime much sooner than we thought. So they're like,
the current solution will.
Right. So I would say that's not exactly necessarily the end, but I think a turning point in terms of transformation, right? We now need to rethink our businesses much faster. I thought I would have more time. I must be really honest here. I was a little bit more cynic in terms of how things were like hyping AI. And I was like, that it won't be that good that fast. And especially in big companies, those are the environments where I operate. But that's not really the case because the use cases are real. We've been tackling lots of them, basically using the low-hanging fruit approach. I think in terms of productivity, not exactly those chatbots UIs where you chat and you get information, because I think that's where a lot of the hype came from ChatGPT OG, and then everybody thought that was it. But actually, you have a lot of workflows, automations, and interfaces that you can create. For example, we use it for document validation, and we tried that 3 years ago. It was like really bad in terms of technology. Now it seems like much even like better than humans, or even a very specialized manual approach that we had. So that makes me really exciting, but also a little bit worried about how fast can I move or change my course in order to be able to absorb all of those changes, and how procurement will respond. But I see that demand urges, and now technology maybe has a way in enterprise companies and procurement organization much faster than it had previously on the SaaS era or in the ERP era, for instance.
Perfect. James, should we throw away our product roadmaps already?
No, I mean, I completely agree actually with what Leo just said. And I think he made some great points. I think concretely, AI is a big topic, right? But I think the two areas that I'm seeing the biggest impact in terms of practical use cases are its ability to be able to take unstructured data and make sense of it, particularly around spend analytics and SRM. If it's able to take like Teams or Slack chats and be able to make sense of that and put it and put it into context. And the other one is the ability now for it to be able to process natural language. So, at the very upstream, if you have someone that wants to buy something and that doesn't know how to use one of these legacy clunky systems, instead of them bypassing that and just calling up their friend that can supply something, it makes compliance that much easier, because you're making it easier for that requisitioner than sending an email to their procurement team. So if you make your stakeholders' lives easier, they're more likely to comply with your procurement policy. So they're the two biggest areas concretely on AI. The other area that I think, and this is not as sexy, but I think especially for smaller businesses, if you've got someone that's quite tech-minded and that's quite visionary, you can do quite a lot with no-code tools. So, I'm not a tech guy, but we are building actually a contract database using no-code. You could build a supplier onboarding tool with a no-code app, something like Airtable or Jotform. And, if you're a $5 million business, that's game-changing, and you probably couldn't do that a few years ago.
Right. Well, I like two things that you said. Like, first, that now we can work with unstructured data, right? Because in the past we thought, okay, first we need to organize our data, then we can have something like meaningful for the business in terms of analytics and so, right? But now you're right. I mean, we don't need to structure the data anymore, right? We simply can train any AI agents to extract information from. And I also like, you in procurement software, you work mostly with mid-sized companies, right? Or you normally target those, right? And they have like an advantage, I think, versus the large organizations that we know, right? That they could do a leapfrog in terms of technology, right?
Yeah.
When you are advising them in your work, are you seeing this movement? So yeah, escape from the big ERP systems, go to a no-code solution or any other platform.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think they're still going to have an ERP unless they're a fairly young startup or they're really a micro business. So they're going to have some sort of finance or accounting system if they don't have an ERP. If they're a manufacturing business and they're above 200 or so employees, they're probably going to have they're not going to be running SAP necessarily, but they've probably got some kind of ERP system. Where I think the advantage is that, and you raised a great example around leapfrogging, it's a little bit like mobile phone technology that, if you go to somewhere like Kenya or even Brazil, they've got world-class mobile payment and mobile wallet applications because a large percentage of the population is unbanked. And you kind of had this jump where people didn't have a phone and then said they suddenly had a cell phone because landlines were too expensive to build the infrastructure. And it was just too expensive for the average lower middle class family in those economies to have that type of technology. And I think the same now with procurement technology, that if you're a mid-sized business or if you're a high growth tech company that's approaching this from a completely greenfield environment, you're not going to go out and buy something like Ariba or Cooper. You're going to go out and buy an intake solution, or you're going to go out and buy a niche specific solution like what you're doing at Growing Co. if you're a consumer goods firm, or if you want to clean your data, you're going to look at Linkana. You're not going to go and buy one of these all-in-one suites that are, they're built on quite old technology now. It's, Cooper came onto the market, I think 2006, 2007. Ariba's been around even longer. So if you're looking at it from a greenfield perspective, you're probably going to go for something that's more industry leading in terms of the tech that's behind it. So yeah, they do have, the disadvantage is they're not going to have the center of excellence and they're not going to have the level of knowledge of the marketplace that big corporates are going to have, but they can implement and they can iterate a lot quicker because they're leaner, they have less bureaucracy, and they're able to leapfrog, like you say, that legacy tech that they're not going to have to somehow rip out and put something new in. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And on that matter, I think what really blew my mind is it's kind of a paradigm shift. So because we were always discussing on this idea whether you have or you don't have an ERP, or I'm on this SAP as a drama and I'm living it and it's bad. But the new view that I now have based on this agentic era that we are now living in, is like, I'm giving you an example. I have an ERP, a smaller one. It's not SAP, of course, but I hate it. In terms of UI, UX, it's like really bad. It doesn't have the APIs to automate lots of stuff that I would like to. Like, for example, I'd like to have my invoicing already integrated with tax, and that I can do that with APIs. And user must do that manually, so it's really bad when you have volume. But previously, my only option would be change the solution. But now you can kind of ignore that the UI is bad. You can create a layer of agents that will use this solution with any problem at all, because they can learn, they know the business rules, so I don't have to train like some administrative employee to learn and to use that really bad solution. And that to me blew my mind in terms of options that you now have, because I'm talking about Linkana in a very specific concept, but we heard that also when Eloise Epstein was explaining that for her, now that Kearney, for example, has SAP, she doesn't need to use SAP as long as Kearney launches its agentic layer. So the agent will interface with SAP and she will use the agent to ask for stuff and the agent will provide. That is the new paradigm, the paradigm that I think we will see more and more. Solutions will still be there, but we won't see them as much as we are used to, especially the ones that are really not strong on UX, but really strong on data foundation, or you need the history of data, for example.
Yeah, and to your point, Leo, if you're a big corporate, I mean, Kern is not even that big in that sort of context. But if you're Volkswagen or if you're Bosch, can you imagine trying to rip out your ERP system or your procure to pay system and replace it with something more modern? You know, if you're operating in 100+ countries, it's, I won't say impossible, but it's going to be a multi-million-pound, years-long IT project. So yeah, if you've got tech that you can put on top of it, then yeah.
No, I totally agree. I don't want to see those gray SAP screens anymore. They are just horrible. Leo, there are so many different applications that a solution like yours or like mine that we could use AI, right? In terms of changing the experiences that our users have. And I don't know about you, but when I think, okay, it's time to release some AI agents to my clients, sometimes it is hard to understand where we should start from, right? There are so many different AI agents that we could build in our solutions. What's your big bet now? If you were to create, I don't know, your first AI agent in Linkana, or what are you working on right now?
I think that's the 1 million or $1 billion question, or I don't know, or the 1,000 reais question if you really do it wrong. But I think there's two ways on thinking about it. And that's what really throws me, because I don't know the right answer. I think none of us really know. But I would say the first one would be the rating on what you already have. For example, we are really biased by our current product as it is. So we are always trying to improve what we have. So I don't know if that's wrong or right, but for example, I'm a SaaS solution for supplier onboarding. The whole UI and UX for SaaS, everybody kind of expects what you get. You get an interface where supplier is going to input some data, and then data gets validated automatically or not, whatever, then gets approved, registration gets approved, goes to ERP, done. So that's basically how we approach this. So the iterating way of thinking about agentic work would be, hey, if there are manual labor that's being done in terms of collecting documents or reviewing documents or approvals, we can automate all that based on a SaaS UI. So that's basically the easy or the obvious answer, and things that we are, for example, currently doing. We were automating stuff that we couldn't do without AI in terms of interpretation of documents, extracting data that we weren't able to do in mass volume as we are, and much cheaper as this guy launch new things gets much cheaper. But I think coming back to our previous point, is iterating in our current SaaS the way to go or to move forward? Is SaaS the right UI? We just said for ERP, probably they're not. So they're like replacing the UIs for ERPs and changing to a new UI that we currently is not that mature. It's kind of what's the paradigm now is kind of chatting with a bot and bot providing answer. But for technical stuff, that kind of gets hard, because you kind of want to know what the bot did to think, and you want to see reasoning. You want to be able to change or to make some kind of changes. So people are now trying to understand this chat plus background that you need. And then I ask myself, am I someone who is getting its SaaS also replaced in terms of UI? Are my customers going to build their own agents and say, no, I don't need to learn Linkana, I'll just put some agents to blah, blah, blah. So my supplier will do that. Oh, I won't do onboarding on Ariba, on Linkana, on whatever. I'll just build a agent that does onboarding, whatever. And my UI is going to be completely irrelevant, you know? So I think that's what really bothers me in terms of what should I be doing, because it's kind of two completely different approaches, so to say. One is, we have what we have. Let's iterate here and let's make this better, and let's use the agents to improve. Or this here is like, hey, probably throw basically most of that away in terms of UI, because you won't need that, and put your user to talk to a thing that will go to your database or to where you reach the APIs. And that to me is the tipping point of this whole agenda, where SaaS really needs to decide, or we as SaaS founders need to really understand and make a bet. Because I think it's a bet. We don't know where the market's going, and we have to try it as good as we can to understand the best way.
Maybe James can help us, because I don't know, when you're talking to either procurement directors or the responsible in those organizations, right, that they want to buy procurement software, procurement tech, do they know what they want when they come to you? Or how's like the assessment of that? Because I'm thinking, of course, my playbook would say that I have to interview my customers to understand where I should go, or I need to do UX and blah, blah, blah. But seriously, I don't know if I ask my customers if I could trust in their answers, because I don't know where they are in their tech journey, right? So what's your point on that?
There are usually two distinct categories. Mm-hmm. You'll get someone that will come with a really vague scope and say, and this is actually a client project I did last year that said, hey, we want to know how we can use AI in our supply chain. I was like, okay, it's a little bit broad. Can we narrow it down a little bit? And then once I'd sort of asked a few probing questions, what he really wanted to do was to be able to use either AI or just robotic process automation to be able to eliminate a lot of the administrative processes that his buying team and logistics team were getting involved in. So once we'd taken that, we could look specifically around which ones are the high impact, low investment areas that we could improve. The other one that I tend to get is when the customer is looking for a unicorn that doesn't exist, and it's a little bit like when you're looking for a partner and you list all of the qualities that you want to have, and you think, yeah, you're still going to be there when you're 50, you're looking for the right one. That when you get them coming asking they want a procure-to-pay system that does contract management, that does SRM, that does risk management, that's got AI built into it, and so well,
that is true.
Right. And that only costs like $1,000 a month. Mm. And then you kind of have to break it down and say, okay, we can do 70% of this in one platform. We can move on with this, but then if you're adamant that you want the rest as well, then we're going to have to either look at building something that does a specific point solution, maybe in no code, or we're going to have to look at a number of different apps that we can use to mesh it all together. So it tends to be the two extremes. They don't know what they want, but they understand the problem, but they don't know the solution. Mm-hmm. Or they're trying to specify it too narrowly, and they will never find a solution on the market that does all of that.
And I think now more than ever on that point, there's a saying in product management, in order for you to build the right solution, you have to leave off what the customers say it's the problem, but it's actually the solution. Like when it says, I want AI in supply chain, that's a solution. What the hell? What's your problem? It's administrative work. What kind of work? Oh, the guy needs to input purchase orders manually every day, blah, blah, blah. So that probably goes more on the problem side, and this AI on supply chain more on the solution side. But in the last 10 years or so, we still had like a frame where we would have always the problem put in terms of solution, and that's SaaS. We would always think about some kind of screen where the user would need to use. And now more than ever, I think my take on this point of James is now more than ever, we have to be really thoughtful and really specific in terms of the problem we are solving. We have to go back to the essentials, because now the sky's the limit in terms of the solutions that we can provide. It's not, like I said, it's not more on that frame. The frame was broken, broken and open, and now there's a lot of other ways to do stuff. And I think our challenge would be to, when the guy says, I need to automate administrative work, and probably let's build like a whole set of agents here that will do all the administrative work, and you need no new solution at all. I will just build that in off your stack already. That's completely different from everything we built to solve, because we would say, no, you have to switch from your provider to mine, or I will integrate to make that provider use with mine solution. Now it's kind of, no, I would just input someone that seems like a human. It has a name. I'm going to call it Agent 77. He's going to do all of this much cheaper. And yeah, but we need to fundamentally understand the problem and forget about what the customer thinks the solution is. And more on that, what we think was the frame that a solution should be put in.
Right. What do you guys see as the main hurdle for technology in procurement and implementation? Is it like, especially when it comes to people mindset, right? Is there still a resistance there? And what are companies doing to overcome it?
Yeah, so before I tackle that, I mean, budget is the biggest one because typically companies invest into sales and marketing, they invest into HR, they invest into manufacturing. They don't often invest into procurement and supply chain. And I think part of that is we as a function are not very good at marketing. And procurement leaders historically have been quite technocratic and quite process focused in their personalities. It's maybe a little bit controversial, but I would almost say procurement is almost now two different functions. You've got, okay, compliance and regulation is important. You know, especially if you're a big company, you can't get embroiled in supply chain scandals. But that's a completely different personality and skill set to like a visionary founder. And we need that type of personality in procurement too, that can go out there and speak to guys like yourselves and understand what's out there on the market without just taking the risk-averse approach of I'm just going to buy whatever software is from the well-known legacy brands. So I think budget is certainly a hindrance, but if you market yourselves well and you're able to communicate to the business the added value for them, you know, not just your procurement team and how it will solve their problems, then the budget will come. And it's all about starting small, getting a pilot use case, you know, try in one manufacturing plant or one office and get some momentum and build on that. You know, you're not going to go out and be able to get a $500,000 budget to go out and buy a big source to pay suite if procurement historically has been a very tactical, order-pushing administrative function. So it's all about starting small and building momentum.
Great. So I have final questions for both of you. I know it is a good conversation. Leo, if you were starting Linkana today, what would you do different from when you started back in? When did you start Linkana?
Between 2018 and 2019.
Yeah, the world changed a lot since then, right? So what would you do different?
That's a hard question. Probably a lot. Yeah, it could go hours, and you probably would also say the same if I asked you the same question. But I think on my last point, I wouldn't say I would do things differently because we are where we are, and I learned a lot, and I'm really grateful. And I don't see it as a regret, but I know it was like a weakness that we needed to tackle with a lot of resilience. I hate that word, but we needed to go through was my lack of understanding of the problem that I was solving. I'm differently from James. I'm not a procurement practitioner. I didn't know the space. I was just tackling something that was like very, very lateral, and the technology was kind of similar of something that procurement needed for supplier onboarding. And this kind of very sinuous path brought me to understand procurement from a guy that came from like, I'm a lawyer. I worked in very traditional companies, but more on finance, more on legal. I didn't even understand the need of procurement because I was a medium-sized company. Usually we're very transactional about how we think about procurement. So I would probably, I want to say Linkana as a procurement software, but Linkana as founding a new company, for example. I would probably be more interested or would do a company on a scenario in which I understood the problem much better, or I would study the problem much better to be able to formulate hypotheses on this kind of solution that should be needed to building, because without understanding the problem, we make much more mistakes than you should, right?
Yeah. There's also the other side of the coin, right? When you know too much about a problem, you can also be biased to solve it, right? So there are like both ways to
solution bias, probably, because you already think you know the solution and you have that in your head. But I think that if you are able to isolate the problem, you can make huge work and much better than someone that really doesn't understand the space.
Mm-hmm. Great. James, so as Linkana is going now international, we as Grorinco, by the way, I didn't say, but we are a co-manufacturing platform and we do a bunch of other stuff, but let's stick with it. We were born global, right? I had a global position in procurement when I started the company. So it was like kind of easy to spread the solution with my network that I had, right? It was good and bad because we didn't concentrate in one market. At the beginning, we were just too spread out for our size, right? But now, of course, we were born in LatAm, in Latin America, more specifically in Brazil, even though we supply our solution to other countries. And I know that you've been like searching, screening the Latin American market as well, looking for solutions, and you know the global market in terms of Procuretech pretty well, right? What are like the advices that you would give for the LatAm procurement tech founders? And what's your perception about the LatAm Procuretech ecosystem?
Yeah, so I think on the one hand, you have an awesome opportunity that you don't have much competition down here, and the biggest players that are serving the Fortune 500 companies that have regional procurement centers down here. Okay, they're here, but there are not really any native niche category specific solutions targeting the local market. There's there are you guys. There are a couple of solutions in Mexico. There's one that I've come across in Argentina, but there's not much. So it's a pretty greenfield marketplace. So I think the challenge is always awareness, especially once you go beyond enterprise organizations and more down to the mid-market. If procurement teams are not as mature or are not as skilled as maybe they are in Western Europe or in North America, it's always about then, okay, well, who do you try and sell that solution into? Because they might see you as a threat. So depending on what your solution is, you might have better opportunities selling into the VP of supply chain or into the CFO, for example. I think the other thing is just because it's quite an isolated region, it's so far away from everywhere else. I know, Leo, you're going to DPW in New York and you were in Amsterdam a couple of years ago. I think that's important, even if you're not sponsoring the conferences, just go as an attendee, because you will learn so much and you'll make so many contacts and you'll just have much more of an idea about the pulse of the market and the type of questions and challenges that procurement are experiencing right now.
Yeah, maybe I'll have to change my flight and attend DPW in New York. I wasn't planning that. Great, guys. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. We should make a challenge to talk like in 6 months from now to see how our product roadmaps evolved, what decisions we took.
I don't know if I want to do that. I think I'm going to be depressed somewhere, some dark corner crying.
And James, also for you to tell us how much your clients are buying AI for procurement, right? So yeah, let's see. A lot will change in those next 6 months, and we'll be taking a closer look into that. So guys, thank you so much. I hope to see you guys soon. And James, enjoy Brazil. I know you're going to Floripa next week. So nice beaches and places. So enjoy it.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Leo, for coming.
Thanks.
Always my friends. Yeah. Bye. Talk soon. Bye.